It is a great pleasure to introduce the 2020 Buckendale lecturer, Mike Roeth, who has worked in the commercial vehicle industry for over 30 years. He is currently serving as Executive Director of the North American Council for Freight Efficiency and leads the trucking efficiency operations for the Rocky Mountain Institute. Mike's specialty is brokering green truck collaborative technologies into the real world at scale. He understands the customers, operations, and intricacies of the commercial vehicle industry, having held various positions in product development, engineering, reliability and quality, sales, materials, and plant management with Navistar and Bayer Cummins. I am truly honored to introduce Mike Roeth, the 2020 Buckendale Award Lecturer, and I really want to thank you, Mike, for all the work you've done into preparing this. Turning it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Giorgio. It really is an honor to provide this 2020 L. Ray Buckendale lecture. It's the, I think the 65th, and I've been attended many of these lectures in my 35 years as an SAE member. So, let's get right to it. The topics I'll cover today are in the manuscript that has been published. And, sometimes these manuscripts are a little daunting and a little scary, but once you get through it, it is really rewarding to not only share topics in this presentation, but also to do it as an author. So I'd encourage SAE authorships and anyone out there who has a great topic for Buckendale to give it a shot. So this particular transformational technologies lecture, the scope of this work is ground transportation. And we're specifically going to talk about commercial trucks that move goods. And this actually matches the scope of the North American Council for Freight Efficiency, which is the organization I have the honor of leading. And we're currently faced with a plethora of challenges and solutions, some of which we show here in this tidal wave. And sometimes it can feel really daunting as a commercial vehicle engineer. But this is a good thing. Because it certainly can be overwhelming, but it's a good thing. We have a lot of choice. We could stand idly and get washed away by this tidal wave. We could run up on the beach and avoid it, or we can act and jump on a surfboard and ride that wave. It's a really exciting time to be in commercial trucks. Most of you are likely involved in the process of truck development. Whether you're a manufacturer or an end user, maybe even some others that participate in this process. And over the years, the truck builders have fine-tuned the process to develop, design, test, and deploy features and technologies. This is one such truck process published at this conference about 15 years ago. And at that time, Navistar technical leaders shared the experience of limiting design changes in the final stages. That's that line there, to make sure of a successful launch. That's the line where change is high early and limited later as the development goes from validation to deployment. But new technologies keep coming, so this actually can cause a rush of new features being added after launch. And with all this change and all this excitement going on in the industry, there are a lot of claims by new commercial vehicles where they might be claiming to be in production. And so at NACFE, we went and studied what it means to be in production. And in the last year or so, led by Rick Mihalik, we analyzed current truck development processes and published some insights in a report we titled Defining Production. And that was published in January 2020. And here's sort of how we viewed the stage gate process going from, defining and getting the program approved all the way to a closing review later on. And you can see the whole point of product development is to lower risk, but with that comes a lowering of design flexibility. And, with that, a high level of involvement by engineers and management, as well as investment in the technology, all of that lowering as the product goes into production and provides income for the manufacturer. And then once the product is available, that starts the purchasing, or often called adoption, by end users. Here, for what we're talking about, that would be commercial truck fleets. Innovation diffusion is the concept where new products gain momentum and spread through a specific population. Innovators, then early adopters, later adopters, and laggards, and sometimes that late adopters is called and separated out into early majority and later majority. All that starts to evolve as they purchase the new thing. This chart was literally developed in NACFI's first meeting in 2010 after its launch. And so our goal as an organization was to accelerate that adoption curve, whether it's for all a complete new truck model or anything in particular as it comes available for the marketplace. And so here we laid on top of each other these two curves. The first one is where you have the product development and the manufacturer's level of effort peaks and then goes down as you go to production. And then later, as that diffusion occurs, the fleets begin to scale the technology. And in the background of this are many S-curves for individual features or ongoing product enhancements and emerging technologies that occur within the truck models. So now I'd like to get into some of the technologies that are emerging, and 2020 seems clearly to be the tipping point for electric trucks. Manufacturers are making the trucks available, and early adopting fleets are implementing them with help from governments and utilities with incentives. A lot of that's taking place right now in California. And recently there have been announcements surrounding regulations. NACFI concludes that the future is truly electric, that there will be a messy middle between now and that electric future. So let me explain that real quickly. This messy middle, in many ways, is a really good thing, as most sustainable solutions will begin to emerge. These things are items like compressed natural gas and liquefied natural gas, or hybridization, whether it's diesel or one of those CNG motors, renewable natural gas, where we can burn some really harmful methane in these commercial trucks would be a really good thing for the environment, and on and on. So there's all of these that will occur as we move from what's traditionally 100% diesel powered trucks to 100% electric trucks. There will be a multi-decade messy middle in between. And automation. In the paper, we talk a good bit about automation, but electrification is the topic that we choose to take throughout the whole manuscript. And automation, though, will play a real role as the various powertrains also find their place in the market. Safety and the cost of operation opportunities are very large, and many scenarios are being integrated and investigated. Steve Vasili, a friend of mine in NACFI's, proposed several scenarios as he looked at the effect of this automation on truck driver and labor within moving goods. And both ends here are of the route for a particular goods movement is zero emission trucks. This scenario shows electrification as the goods move from maybe a manufacturer to a port out to the highway, and then also electric when it gets back down to the final mile, maybe to homes or to businesses. In that middle, he suggests a autonomous platoon in the middle, possibly with completely autonomous trucks, or possibly, a autonomous vehicle following maybe a truck-driven vehicle. So a lot to ponder here. And yesterday's keynote focused on that middle section of autonomous driving with Too Simple. So let's now take a deeper look at the commercial vehicle industry and this goods movement in particular, its complexities with respect to technology adoption. New innovators must thrive within the current freight system, which is made of many dynamics. So in April of this year, part of it was because I was stuck home with the pandemic, but also in celebration of the 50th Earth Day and getting ready for this Buckendale lecture, I interviewed a lot of people to look at 50 years of progress in trucking. And I could take a whole hour talking about what I learned and sort of where we've been since the 1970s and then also looking out into the 2020s or 2040s. But it would take just too much time. But really, we should be very proud of the progress we've made in the industry and where we're headed. So a few particulars about the commercial industry that I've come to love in my 35 years and also curse at times. These next set of slides help put into perspective the environment that commercial vehicle engineers must operate within. Now, first is annual production, and it varies significantly for commercial trucks. It's a huge dynamic for our industry, and I remember sharing to the automotive industry early in my career, this sort of variation in revenue and production. And it was kind of shocking to the passenger car industry. And so, but it's something we deal with in commercial trucks over the course of our careers. We're going through one of those tumultuous low revenue periods right now with lower truck production and really a couple of months of no production earlier in this year. Look at 2006 in particular, where the industry built 750,000 units in class 3 to 8. And then just a couple of years later, it was reduced to about 300,000. Think about that. That's less than half of the production and really a big challenge for our industry. And the mix has changed as well. Here, this is an ACT Research provided us this data for the last 75 years, and this is the mix of that truck build. And so if you look over the last 30 years, class 3 to 5, and that'd be blue and those ones on the bottom, has grown significantly. And that's e-commerce, also growth in pickup trucks and some of the smaller vehicles that end up in commercial vehicles. And that has been shrinking class 6 and 7, mostly box trucks in particular. One interesting historical point of note here is if you look back at the beginning of this, when the interstate highway system first started, there were very little big trucks on our freeways. And so that yellow and green class 7 and 8, grew substantially in those 20 years. And then we had deregulation in the early 1980s, which then caused even more growth of big semi trucks before now we've had this growth in the smaller ones. Diesel fuel, which has been the energy source for the vast majority of these trucks, fluctuates a lot as well. It was around $1 a gallon for decades, and then it moved to, $2, $2.50 for a few years, stabilized around $4 for a number of years, had a huge drop, and now kind of maybe stable again in the high twos, maybe around $3. What that means for, a semi truck is that, at lower fuel times, that $2.50, it'd be about $30,000 to fuel a semi truck over its work. But as it moved up into $4, that's like $70,000 a year to fuel that truck. And when you're speccing that tractor and trailer and buying it, you're sort of locking in that fuel economy for 10 years. And so it's really important to think about the purchasing of technologies on these trucks, which brings us to cost per mile to operate a heavy-duty tractor trailer in the United States. The American Transportation Research Institute surveys thousands of fleets each year, and we look at this data, and they'll have their new data coming out in the next month or so, which will show us 2019. But here in 2018, the fuel cost at the bottom, is big. And back when that fuel cost was at that $4 level, the fuel at 65 cents a mile was even higher than the driver and their benefits at 57 cents a mile. So, commercial engineers absolutely need to do a lot of work in the fuel economy space just because of cost. Another dynamic on commercial trucks is how the trucks are used. And it's not so much how they're used, but how that use might change over time. They end up staying closer to home and driving lower miles in their out years. In some segments, trucks are even sold during these handoffs. And this is exaggerated a little bit, but there are 5 handoffs here that could happen within one company or could happen as they sell the truck to different companies. Once you get out into that local and agricultural, the miles can get very low. And a discussion of heavy-duty tractor efficiency wouldn't be complete without recognizing the United States Department of Energy's now almost 12-year program known as Super Trucks. The first program helped produce many features that have become available on the program, even before it ended. And now as new trucks are launched, technologies that came out of that program we see all the time. People ask me, when will I be able to start buying a super truck? And I'm saying you can. It's just like one feature at a time and not as noticeable. Now we have Super Truck 2, and it's expanding the number of technologies, but also Super Truck 2 is having a keen effort on affordability and making these technologies more affordable for fleets. As I mentioned earlier, the industry has dealt with pollutant emissions, and I'm really proud of that. We should all be. It takes 70 trucks today to produce the NOx and particulate matter of 1 when we started this journey, and we did that really over only 10 years. I mentioned this for a few reasons. First, it's hard to maintain the improvement in fuel efficiency when you're also cleaning the air. And so over the course of all of these EPA regulations, many affected fuel economy in a negative way. So less emissions, cleaner emissions, but burning more fuel. And so that's a challenge for commercial vehicle engineers. But finally, I also wanted to mention that sometimes there are consequences that affect the industry with regulations. After some difficult operational problems with the 2004 EGR emissions regulations that were actually pulled forward to October of 2002, buyers were really worried about the 2000 change, and that caused a significant pre-buy of trucks. And that you can see between the 2006 Class 8 production levels and the 2007. In recent years, regulations have been focused on carbon with the EPA federal greenhouse gas rule. And here we have both phase 1 and phase 2. And this chart, it's in the paper, and it comes from our friends at the International Council for Clean Transportation. This describes the fuel economy stringency, or the improvement of around 45% on Class 8 tractor, sleeper tractors, and their commensurate trailers once this rule is completely complete out in the 2030 timeframe. So let's now dig in deeper into that adoption, or that technology diffusion I was talking about earlier. And since 2012, NACFE has conducted what we call an annual fleet fuel study. 21 fleets shown on the left have participated, and NACFE, they give us their technology purchasing history for 85 technologies back to 2003. And these fleets represent a lot of the truck production. So here's the result of that study. Giorgio, I want your thoughts on this very simple graph. But here are those 85 technologies S-curves. And it's hard to tell anything from the mess. I get that. But look closely as you see in the lower right-hand corner. So this is where the more recent years for these 21 fleets, and you see how those technologies are becoming more dense. There's more of them. And there's actually more of them that are having steeper launches, so they're or adoption curves, and so that's a really good thing. But buried in here, for instance, is the rise and fall of some technologies: diesel auxiliary power units for idle reduction, trailer rear fairings, which grew and then fell off, and wide base tires. So their first generation products seemed promising, but they fell off as their challenges of adoption were too great versus the benefits. And now then what we see is good commercial vehicle engineers coming up with other novel ways to solve that technology problem and bring technologies that will then help the fleets and reduce fuel consumption. Given this lecture, I thought I would detail in and look at just the powertrain ones. So here's some of those powertrain technologies that are involved in that. And one of the things you see here is a real growth in the 2010, 2013, 14 timeframe and on up to today, I guess this last decade. And that's due in two parts. One, the high fuel price that we did experience, and secondly, getting ready for these GHG regulations. And so these fleets also provide their fleet-wide fuel economy to us. And they've improved their fuel economy. They can do it in really two ways that would show up on this MPG graph. One is they can buy more fuel efficiency technologies on their trucks and their trailers, the main reason for our work. But secondly, they can take operational improvements such as driver training or fine-tuning engine parameters to get them better fuel economy. And so what we've seen over the last 15 years by these 21 fleets is a 2% year-over-year fuel economy improvement in their fleet-wide. So it's not just their current new trucks, but all of the trucks that they're operating. And that's really encouraging. The purple at the bottom is the national average, and we're starting to see that begin to move as well. And one interesting visualization from the report is shown here. The 85 technologies are the rows, and each of the fleet's adoption decision over time is in the columns. They don't want to be named in particular, so we have each fleet known as A to A and B and C and onward. Green denotes that the fleet is now buying 100% of their trucks or trailers with that technology. Yellow is they buy on some of their tractors and trailers, but not all. Red is really interesting, where they bought the technology for a while and then stopped, and white means they never did. And so this provides a roadmap for other fleets to benchmark their own purchasing against these fleets, as well as for manufacturers and suppliers of not only full trucks, but components to have a look. And so by 2016, NACFeed studied a lot of these technologies, continued that fleet fuel survey, and we began to wonder, what are the best MPG that fleets could get using, what if they used most of the technologies and they did it with the trained, experienced drivers? Sort of what performance is being achieved by the best of the best out there. And so we came up with Run on Less. It's a 3-week, every 2-year demonstration. And we found that answer in 2017 that it was 10.1 miles per gallon for long haul. And that really even surprised me that they were really getting it done. And this Pareto chart here shows a significant amount of days. These are truck days driving where they were over 9.5 miles per gallon. You can find a whole lot of information about this at runonless.com, and there's like 70 story from the road videos that are there that might be really interesting. And so what we offered was a 10 actions to 10 MPG. So think about this in terms of technologies available today for fleets where they can improve their fuel economy as they purchase new ones. But the technology is not sitting still. So those 10 steps that we talked about for fuel efficiency, we have that in the now column to the left. And what we see is a lot of other technologies beginning to evolve, and really some in the more disruptive, transformational, or even revolutionary area. Things like solar on trucks or electric and self-driving trucks, all could be just that, somewhat transformational and disrupt the industry. Fleets and manufacturers, and for that matter, legislators, financiers, and others, we need to improve the current while also preparing for and launching the new. And most notably, maybe, is the emergence of electric trucks. And let's focus on electric trucks really for the rest of the time that we have together. You remember this graphic from a little earlier on the left. The future, we believe, really is electric. But in the interim, we'll have this messy middle. A lot of great solutions are emerging. This makes it super challenging and forces us as an industry to take a bigger picture look at not only the effects of utilizing the fuel in the vehicle, typically termed tank to wheels, but also in understanding the effects of making and transporting the fuel, sort of the well to wheels. And I guess on electric trucks, that well doesn't maybe even make sense. But we need to have a more comprehensive look to evaluate these technologies. It's our conclusion that no one technology will replace diesel, even in this electric future. And at least for some time, we'll also see a number of others. So it's really important to understand the fleet's duty cycle, whether you own and operate trucks or whether you're providing products to them. And here are 4 solutions in the messy middle where their attributes make them successful in different places identified by the payload hauled and the miles per shift. Also, dwell time for fueling might be another one, or charging. That could be a parameter that helps us determine which technology. So I get asked all the time, what's going to win? And we think there'll be a number of winners. And what'll be important is which ones win for each particular customer and duty cycle. And remembering and digging even deeper into this adoption curve idea with respect to electric trucks shows the opportunity for improvement with respect to the diesel incumbent. So we've been designing and building and operating diesel trucks for over 100 years. And we worked and improved them quite a bit. But how much and how fast will the improvement occur for these electric trucks, whether they're fuel cell electric or pure battery electric? And how fast will those advances grow? Also, I wanted to share some thoughts on decision bias, a concept surrounding promising expectations of new products versus the actual performance delivered later on. In our first guidance report on electric trucks, where we titled it Where They Make Sense, we found that there are clear optimists and pessimists for those for and against electric trucks, each oftentimes hyping their opinions beyond practical sense. And this added, things like weight without the batteries taking out or using old baselines. As we look at the new, in this case, electric trucks versus the old diesel trucks, it's very important to take an unbiased view and look at it. This leads to the concept of over-advertising the benefits of a new product. Now, I get and we understand that developers need money to bring their ideas to market. And to get that attention by the market, the new needs to be much better than the incumbent. But this can enter significant bias into decisions, and particularly as the product moves to, out of development and into this adoption, which could cause buyers later to be disappointed in the new features. And if that doesn't make truck product development and adoption decisions tough enough, the nature of moving goods is changing. E-commerce and new technologies such as global positioning and load matching is changing how freight gets moved. And as mentioned before, final mile with smaller vehicles and a change in the middle mile with shorter, more dedicated hub and spoke routes is occurring fast. In 2018 and 19, we studied this, and we conducted a Run on Less, our second one in 2019, looking at regional haul. Here you can see on the right a Meyer truck in one day of 140 days that we noted and followed, where that this is grocery, where they left Lansing and did a number of stops and came home. But you really need to get in and understand this changing dynamics in this middle mile. And what we've learned here, we really believe and see that electric trucks can be an opportunity because of their return to base nature, which allows for more dwell time to charge. I also want to address the variation in electricity pricing. I won't go into a lot of detail, but it appears that over time, electricity pricing is much more stable than diesel fuel and other fuels that we've used in the past. Another item is the key to successful technologies in commercial trucks is that they have to have an acceptable total cost of ownership or a satisfactory payback on the fleet's investment. Truck fleets often call this that it does or does not pencil out. So for transformational technologies, this TCO calculation can be incredibly complex and challenging. And the new truck or the new technology might have many unpredictable risks. I mean, we're used to that, that are not yet understood as we think about what it'll cost to operate this new thing down the road. It's our experience that benefits, though, in the new technology are somewhat ignored or given an extremely high threshold for fleets to recognize. We characterize this as hard and soft costs. So I'm kind of talking about soft costs here, where we encourage buyers to monetize all the benefits and consequences. Things like zero emission, where maybe if the truck is coming into a distribution or center or fulfillment center, the fleet may no longer need exhaust systems in there if the truck doesn't have any exhaust coming out of it. It could be a huge saving for fleets, but one that's typically missed, and that's an example of many that we see happening. And finally, if that's not enough challenge for all of us commercial engineers, there will be a transition that occurs. Too often we compare the current state to a future one without regard for how to get from point A to point B. So let's look at a simple example of a truckload fleet selling their trucks after 4 years of use. Here, they'll replace maybe 25% of their trucks each year. And if they buy all of the new, say 100% of an electric truck in the first year, they'll be operating both for 4 years. But that's sort of the best case scenario in all of the trucking industry that I see. There could be, on the other hand, a trucking fleet that keeps their truck for 10 or 15 years and starts slower with electric trucks. This transition then could take 20 or 30 years. That's a transition that really must be planned and fully financially understood as you enter into the new technology. So lastly, for this lecture, we were very fortunate, and I was happy to spend some time with 3 real leading electric truck fleets. We were able to gain insights from these 3 on their earliest adoptions of electric trucks. So many thanks to our friends at PepsiCo, UPS, and NFI for sharing with us their experiences and plans. And so in the paper, we go through this in some detail, but first, I'll go through each one, on a high level here, one per slide. First is PepsiCo's Frito-Lay division and their Modesto, California, full location strategy. Here they are replacing all their diesel trucks with zero or near zero emission technologies. The multi-year project, which is likely the most extensive in the industry right now, focuses on converting an entire fleet, adding electrifying parking stalls for employees, incentivizing their own electric car use, installing a lot of on-site solar and battery storage to reduce the impact on the grid, and employing both electricity and compressed natural gas generation with renewable sources, all by 2021. The battery electric trucks being deployed include 12 Crown forklifts, 3 BYD yard tractors, 6 medium-duty Peterbilt box trucks, and 15 heavy-duty Tesla tractors. Key to deployment is on-site battery storage to help charge the trucks during peak utility demand. We were talking about this with another fleet leader, and they said, and I'll quote, "Really respect what PepsiCo is doing in Modesto. We have the same vision here, but PepsiCo is doing it right, committing fully to it rather than a patchwork approach. PepsiCo will be an example of what good looks like." Secondly, we've got UPS. And as for all fleets, and really most notably United Parcel Service, they're employing the right technology for each application. I can't emphasize how important that is right now with the plethora of solutions that are coming at us. For years, maybe decades, the company has used a rolling laboratory to test and understand the operational benefits and challenges of new technologies. The wide variety of technologies highlights NACFE's view of the messy middle. So what they're doing is they're electrifying their package cars, which supports the finding that we've had that medium-duty urban trucks will be the earliest adopters, maybe after, what we're seeing with transit buses and school buses and some others. But that's due to their limited route miles and return to base each night. UPS has announced they will deploy 10,000 arrival battery electric step vans in the next few years. But it becomes more challenging for their regional haul heavy-duty tractors. Electric trucks do not have the range necessary for these operations. And in fact, they may never will. They may never, as these tractors often drive over 500 miles on a dedicated fast turn on freeways. And then they return to base to be deployed again overnight in an urban setting or maybe even a longer haul. UPS slip seats these trucks or has dual utilization for a vast majority of them. For these tractors, UPS is acquiring more compressed natural gas tractors today and are maximizing the procurement of renewable natural gas, helping to avoid the hazardous effects of methane to the environment. NFI. NFI is a national regional carrier, and they're taking advantage of electric day cab tractors because of their regional haul nature. Here, they operate 4,500 heavy-duty day cab tractors, over 12,500 trailers, and they operate about 50 million square feet of warehouse space. Unlike PepsiCo and UPS, where they have a lot of specification variety for how they haul their goods, UPS or NFI is really the opposite, where their equipment specifications are the diversity of them is very small. Essentially, their needs match the duty cycles where battery electric trucks will emerge first, starting in drayage, then going to maybe beverage and other limited miles routes on up to higher day cab routes. NFI is aggressively deploying early tractors from Freightliner and Volvo in California, but are also looking to scale their expertise in charging infrastructure deployment in other regions across the United States where they have operations. Key lessons from the NFI examples are to utilize incentive funds to help in this early adoption. That they suggested you really engage all participants early and often, and then plan to move fast at the site and then move on to others across their footprint. I again encourage you to download and use the manuscript. Of course, I'm really proud of it and the team that helped me with it. But I do believe it's very helpful to anybody in commercial vehicle engineering, and particularly if you're new to the industry. The paper concludes with a detailed list of conclusions and recommendations. And here are a few that I'd like to summarize. They are that these technologies are really providing value to end users and proving to be more socially responsible. To stay focused on total cost of ownership and monetize as many benefits and consequences as possible, and transparently share your learning to mature the technology's value faster across the industry. Finally, I'd like to thank you for your attention today. And before we move on, I'd like to thank the SAE committee, Rick Mihelic and Denise Rondini, for assisting me with the manuscript, the executives at PepsiCo, UPS, and NFI for their sharing their efforts, and to the NACFE Board of Directors, sponsors, and staff for their support. with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Giorgio, and we can take some questions.
Mike, thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation, and I also want to recognize the fact that you have done it so efficiently and effectively that we have time for a good Q&A. So I have been receiving some very interesting questions coming from the audience, and one of the first ones was, in fact, where do I get the presentation slides? I knew that you would answer that in your last slide. But let me start with a question that you touched on, and maybe we could go a little deeper. So current Class A tractor first ownership averages around 8 to 10 years. And trailer ownership is roughly twice that. Where do you see that going with comparable vehicle first ownership when we look at zero emission vehicle powertrains? Where do you see them going in terms of ownership time, and maybe comparing early adoption versus the adoption growth phase?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it gets to how for transformational technologies, and I'll stay focused on electric, the technology will not be operated identically as diesel. So there will need to be some trade-offs at the operations level. Now, developers don't want to have too many of those and make it too hard for the fleets to operate these electric trucks. But we could see a change in ownership. So let me sort of be clear. Yeah, there's about a 10-year useful life for a tractor that's on the highway getting a lot of miles, and maybe 20 years for a trailer. I would concur with that. But we also see tractor owners trading those trucks more early on. And maybe we won't see that with the electric truck, with the fact that the fleet needs to put in infrastructure and have more, fixed cost with that asset. We could potentially, I think, see a longer ownership of the power unit than what we typically see in diesel trucks today. That'll prove over time. Also along the lines, one of the reasons we also see the leasing organizations being part of the electric truck deployment, because in that case, if an owner operates an electric truck for a while and then they actually lose the business, or their business adjusts, then that asset could go back to the leasing company and be deployed into another customer. So we do see that occurring. Last thing I'd mention, as we brought up trailers, in the U.S., tractors and trailers rarely stay together. And so we see this drop and hook. So tractors move, trailers move, they're completely independent one another, and they come together to move freight. We actually see that as a good thing, because that allows the tractor to unload the freight or unload the trailer, hook up to another trailer, and go. Efficiency is really about keeping these trucks moving and not sitting around waiting to be unloaded and loaded. So we think that drop and hook, and if you're out there working on, automated drop and hook and faster connecting trailers and tractors, we think that's a really good thing for the future.
Excellent, Mike. And, continuing on this general subject of this conversation, obviously electrification is a topic that is of interest to everyone in the audience. I have seen multiple questions related to life cycle, battery replacement. What are the trends here? How will this impact the life cycle of the vehicle? What will happen to recycling? So perhaps you can provide some of your insights in this broad subject.
Yeah, very good. So, and this is a topic I'm thinking about working with Rick Mahalik on in another paper. But what we've learned on studying all this adoption for now 11 years is that, and maybe this is how all of us think about buying something new, but the first is, will it work? So in this case, will the electric truck haul freight? So, that's basically, the calculation of, does it have the torque and the power and the range and just the basic things to make it happen. And then typically there's a second period of phase that they go through to say, okay, well, maybe it'll do the job, but can it be done affordably? And that's where, I recommend that we really dig into that total cost of ownership, monetizing all the benefits and consequences. And then we find that there's typically, a third or fourth, one of which is, what are the, I hate to call them secondary effects, but what are the other effects? So battery recycling is a great example of that. What are the other effects of this transformational technology system that we need to worry about. We also hear a lot about rare materials for batteries and all those things. So it's a good thing that we're talking about those as we're beginning to begin the early scaling of electric trucks. Many of those shouldn't prevent us from starting, but it definitely needs to be addressed as we scale. So that's kind of the phasing of decision making that I think we see with these sort of transformational technologies. And don't get me wrong, these things have to be resolved, but we don't, as engineers, have to have everything resolved to start, is my point.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. So I have to say that a lot of the questions have to do with battery-related topics, and you've touched on it. So I feel that you probably addressed a number of different questions with this answer. But there's an interesting one that talks about what's the vision or what's your view of the e-highway. I'm sure you're familiar with the notion of the Siemens proposed concept on German freeways. Talk to us about it. Do you think there is a future and evolution to that?
So I do, and I think that's a great question to follow up on the answer I just had. So, many times, and I was going to avoid saying it in this lecture, but we need to crawl, walk, and run. And so I view some of these topics as, when we're walking and running, and important to work on. So, of course, if we can power the roadway or maybe on ramps or different areas, or even have wireless charging, which, there's a number of very interesting like DOE projects and others exploring. I think that's a really good thing to help us with what will become bigger issues as we scale. So, in the early days where, we have, like we're in right now, where we might have long dwell times because we don't want packages being delivered to our home at 2 a.m, those trucks sit around a lot. So we can have slow charging. But as we go on and look at longer ranges and this dual utilization that I was mentioning, team driving, or just think about this, Giorgio and everyone, if the self-driving truck emerges and now we have literally a 24/7 driving truck, we now have zero time to fuel or charge. So to your point around electric highways, maybe that's where a lot of those things become not only a thing to consider, but like a requirement.
Very good. Very good. Let me change the topic now. There is a question about potential impact of current/future energy problems. And the writer of the question says, like those currently in California. So the energy landscape, of course, is behind all of this, right? And so what are some of the challenges that may crop up as we look to the future?
Oh, great question. And you are exactly right around the new technologies aren't perfect, and they're not going to solve all of our problems. Sometimes we expect a lot out of engineers as a society, and we should, right? But to stop burning petroleum and its effects in these trucks and start getting to a more a cleaner tank to wheel, we need to be thinking about all of the upstream effects of that. So, we've looked at the studies, there are places where, coal is creating electricity. And so these electric trucks, maybe or maybe not as good as, or aren't as good as places where we're seeing renewables. But we're seeing a huge increase in renewables, right? So all of these challenges need to be thought about. They need to be considered not only with the technology selection, but where we're putting it. And so, where those electric trucks should scale would be in places where would be in places where there's less risk to those things the questioner brings up.
Yeah. And so a related question, which I think is an important thought, and you've addressed it to some extent, but do you see fleet corporate awareness of the well-to-wheel analysis and its importance, or is there a rush to achieving perceived carbon reduction without taking into account the well-to-tank part. And how does that interface with regulations which do not necessarily always take the entire energy cycle into account? This is a tough question, but how do you see it?
Well, so I'll answer it that absolutely yes. Now, first of all, there are pioneering fleets, I would call them, that are very much engaged and involved in all of this. A few of which we were able to get to do these case studies, and there are also the same that holds true in the associations. Whether it's ATA or other NGOs besides us, like CalSTART and ICCT and others that are active in this space, as well as the manufacturers who are thinking about this real comprehensive look at it. But it's not just good enough to look at it. They need to collaborate. The whole industry needs to collaborate. And so when we see regulations emerging and a regulator asking for comments on a rule, we need to participate. We need to get involved. We need to bring facts, not biases to the table, because those are all very important to help scale this. As I hope all of my comments on how complex this industry is and the challenges we have, that makes for all of this really difficult. So it takes all of us working together, very transparent, with less biases, and we'll get her done.
Yeah. Mike, a clear indication of how successful and engaging your presentation has been is the number of questions we cannot answer. I am hoping that, and I think this is true, that all of the comments made in the Q&A and chat will remain. They're not going to get lost. So I apologize to the members of the audience who asked excellent questions that we just don't have time to address directly. I suspect that Mike might be willing to perhaps entertain some of these questions offline. With this, it is 10:55, and I have received some pretty clear instructions about our time schedule. So I would like to thank you again. I will clap my hands for a really absolutely excellent Buckendale lecture and inspiring to all of us who are close to this industry.